Hi, and welcome to Black on the Mat, the space where culture, community, and yoga intersect through our lived experiences. We're your host. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Seisha. Join us on this journey to bring representation and shed light on often overlooked stories on the yoga mat.
We're creating an accessible roadmap into yoga for Black people, building a community in this predominantly white space.
And letting folks already into yoga know that we're here.
So, welcome back to Black on the Mat. Again, I am Seisha, and we have Danielle. And then today, we are so fortunate to have Susanna Barkataki here with us to talk to us about, honestly, so many things. But our topic for today is cultural appropriation versus appreciation and finding balance in the yoga and wellness spaces. And Susanna is an expert in this space and has been building and fighting and creating the space for years. And so we are just honored to have her here today. Susanna, please tell us more about you and how you got into this.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me here and for everyone who's listening. I feel really excited and grateful that you're creating this space. I feel like when I look back at my life, like everything just lined up, right, for me to do the work that I do. So I am an immigrant. I'm mixed. My mom is white, my dad is Indian, and I was born in the UK in England. And we moved to the United States to escape discrimination against mixed and Pakistani and Indian families. So I grew up in this world of like separation, right? And we thought, oh, we're coming to the US. It's going to be, I was a kid, so I don't think I was really thinking about it. My parents were, and it wasn't like, the American dream that we all hoped it would be. It was still a lot of fighting, a lot of discrimination. I was reflecting on this with my kiddo recently because I have a child who's having a very different educational experience than I did. But I wanted to take, like AP English or, honors bio or whatever. And my counselor, I remember saying like, oh, you can take shop and home ec. Those are the classes for your kind of person or your type of person.
I had the same experience. I don't know if we grew up around the same time, but I had the exact same experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is an aside, but my kiddo and I were watching Hidden Figures and it's like, do you realize, because he was like so moved by it, but then I'm like, you realize this is not like, it's not necessarily better now. Like this is, it's maybe not so overt, but yeah. So all of that was the context that I was growing up in. And then I went to a really wonderful high school that was a public school that taught American culture through the lens of race, class, and gender. So it was framing up the things that I was experiencing and giving me an analysis, which I'm so grateful for. And then I left, went to college, came back and taught at that high school. So I had this like analysis from when I was really young, but I still couldn't quite connect it to why I felt like I had to hide my Indianness and try to conform and be as, American, read white as possible. And at the same time, I was practicing mantra, mudra, meditation, not so much asana, but the other kind of aspects of yoga, but hiding it. And then also not finding those aspects of yoga in any of the places like the studios around me. So there was this big disconnect until I realized at a certain point in my 20s, like, oh, all of these things are happening within yoga. It's not, it's part of that cultural exploitation and appropriation and like oversimplification that happens. And when you displace folks of color from a site of our, indigenous wisdom, it makes it so much easier to exploit both us and the wisdom traditions. So it all just kind of led to me speaking up from a place of trying to make sense of it myself, really.
I love that. There's some people who get that there is a cultural background behind this and a spiritual background around the origins, and they want to do good, but they're not sure. So like what advice would you give them if they wanted to practice while being respectful of the culture and the spiritual origins of yoga?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's kind of the same practice we would do when visiting another country or like good scholarship, if we're writing a paper on something. It's like learn about the place of origin and the practices that you're going to be connecting to, and then cite those sources like where the practices came from. And you don't need to be an expert, right? Like when I go to another country, it's not like I show up and like, let me tell you everything there is to know about Singapore, right? But I've learned enough if I'm going there to be able to hopefully not offend people, and also to go with humility and try to do things in a way that's respectful and open. And so I think it's the same with yoga, where yoga didn't come to any one person. It came through and it was developed and codified. So from what we know, right, like what we can actually trace back through textual evidence, and also, it was a practice that sprung up in the Indus River Valley and the Saraswati River Valley in what's now West India and Pakistan. There was trade with Africa, with Egypt and other parts of Africa as well during that time and previous to Vedic and even pre-Vedic times. So from my understanding, yoga evolved in Africa and India thousands, let's say 5 to 10,000 years ago. If you look at Western dating, they'll say we can actually pinpoint it to around 2,500 years ago. But I think it also just depends whose lens you're looking through, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind, is whose perspective are you bringing forward? Like there are a lot of white academics who will tell us certain things about yoga's origin, but the perspective that I'm leaning on is that of teachers from within India, villagers, like from within the tradition, right? So bringing that like critical eye and then coming with respect and citing sources. I think those are the main things I would say. And practicing all of yoga, like knowing you don't have to practice, but at least just know that it's not just asana, it's not just a physical practice or just a fitness practice.
And I love that in your videos, like you're like, this is yoga and that's yoga. And like people don't realize all these different things is yoga. It's not just, being in a core class. And so I think that you do a really good job of helping us understand that different things are yoga that we didn't think are yoga. I think at the same time, I think people, and I'll even say myself, because I want to be, as an African American, I'm so wanting to be respectful of other cultures because I know what it feels like not to have your culture respected. Like, where do you draw the line between appropriation and appreciation?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very tricky, especially when, like, in the framing and the school of thought that I'm in is one that holds up. And for folks who are listening and can't like see what I'm doing, I'm holding one hand up. So on one hand, it's like we're honoring the roots of yoga, and on the other hand, we're connecting to the folks who need these practices most, right? So centering social justice, racial justice, gender, bodily autonomy, trauma-informed practices, recovery practices. Like there's so many, bringing health and well-being to the folks who are disproportionately impacted by health issues that are, killing our communities, right? Like Black and South Asian folks and brown folks in general, I think are 70% more likely to have diabetes or heart attacks, things that are essentially preventable or at least diminishable health concerns. And yoga can impact all of these things. Like there's research-backed benefits that exist that show how impactful yoga is. And so it's tricky because when we're holding both of those things, I do think there's aspects of yoga's roots that aren't actually so helpful, like caste-based oppression, right? And caste is sort of like it's not exactly equivalent to racial bias and racism, but it's very similar. It's a system of power and oppression that
Mhm.
disprivileges some and benefits others, So that we're not bringing forward, right? Patriarchy, we're not bringing forward. We don't want those things. And so I see the conundrum for a lot of folks is like, well, how do I know? Like, what can I bring? What can I not? And I think ultimately it's really about critical thinking and cultural care, right? So care for the culture and then think critically about the communities that you're in or the communities you serve and bring forward what makes sense. And I think also when in doubt, it's like look to the folks who are teaching on these things. So what's great is there's now a lot of folks like South Asian folks that are saying like, hey, this is how you appreciate and not appropriate, you know, and I created a kind of structure or system like if appropriation is power imbalance, one, and harm, two, right? So in meaning someone from dominant culture is harming either the culture or the people, then we can flip those and go for power equalizing and then the opposite of harm, like care, right? So it's anyone, no matter who they are, can use that analysis to be like, oh, is there a power imbalance here? And am I causing harm? Or how can I cause more or create more healing, right? And so we can move from appropriation to appreciation. And there's many, many people to learn from.
And that is part of the reason why, you know, we started talking in the first place, that level of representation that that you provide, that like these creators and yoga teachers from Southeast Asian cultures and Black yoga teachers bringing our voices here to the public scene, like understand there's more to this than, like you said, than the asanas that, oh yeah, just power yoga, go to power hot yoga at 6 a.m. every day with all of the people that look like you and we'll all shop at the same places. Like that's not
Yeah.
all that yoga is. And so you kind of already addressed it here. But I would love to know more about why you fully believe that like representation is important, not just in yoga classes, but also in marketing and leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, something in what you said made me reflect on part of why I was able to speak up and do the work that I did. And I was doing it probably around like 2010 through 2015 before I had an article that like kind of caught the consciousness. Honestly, was because Diane Bondi was doing what Diane Bondi was doing, right? Faith Hunter and Chelsea Jackson Roberts. So it's like Black women who are leading the way with sharing about yoga and its benefits for themselves and for everyone, but also in many cases, particularly for Black communities, right? And so I think that's a really important part of what often gets missed when we're talking about like the Black and brown, the need for Black and brown leadership is so intersectional, and it has been so intersectional actually, and there has been so much like dependence or reliance on that leadership without giving credit to it. And so that for me feels huge. Like for one thing, part of why I could speak up is because even though I'm not Black, right, I was like, oh, women of color are doing this, so I can do this. And I know that I've been that now for some other folks where it's like, oh, I can say these things, I can make these connections, I can, you know, whatever it is, right? And so I can do this. And I feel like that alone is reason enough. Like one is just if we want to, right? Like if that's a choice that we're making in a leadership place we want to take, then great. But also because, you know, yoga, the statistics are so like appalling to me. I think the statistics are something like yoga teachers it's 70% or 72% white folks. I think it's 9% Black folks, maybe, or maybe 7. I'll look it up in a second so I can give you the exact statistics, but it's low, right? Then Latina folks, then Asian folks. And all together, folks of color are less than 20%. So this is a practice that comes from folks of color and has been practiced by them for thousands of years, right? Codified, organized. It's a science, it's a philosophy, it's an ethical, principles for how to live. And then here we are, like, what happened there, right? So I also think that's part of why it's important, is like a reclamation that's also a creating anew, but bringing forward the voices that haven't been represented. And then the last piece is what I talked about with, like, if we don't see people like us doing things that are healthy and promoting well-being, it's hard to imagine ourselves doing those things. And there are so many barriers to well-being. I don't think it's an accident. I think systemic oppression wants us to not be well, and so it's also like, it's a radical act to be like, hey, I'm, not someone who is marginalized, but I'm going to choose to center my own well-being and then to show up and share that with others.
Yeah. There's something you were saying that reminded me of Trisha Hersey. I might be saying her last name wrong, but Rest is Resistance. And it's revolutionary, but they want us to be on drugs because it, feeds pharma and all these different things. And yoga is part of our culture. It's part of our history, and it's how our ancestors healed. But there's such a divide. And like even talking about the divide, when you were talking about, South South Asians, as well as, Blacks or Black and Brown people in America, how do we bridge that gap into those communities?
Yeah. No, it's big. I mean, it's big, I think, in great part because there's a lot of anti-Blackness in the South Asian community. So just naming that, and also a lot of like hierarchy and caste oppression too, that I think goes with racial oppression as well. So I think there's a lot of work internally that the South Asian community has to do and needs to do. I also think by talking, right? By talking about it, and in a way, some of the work that I do is like going to educate other South Asians about it, their anti-Blackness, and also about the solidarity. And then also like knowing the history. There's a lot of history of Black and South Asian solidarity, both in the US and internationally. There continues to be today with, like, I don't know if you all saw about a year ago or a year and a half, when Sandra Rajan's book, The Trauma of Caste, came out. Dr. Cornell West was really supporting Thenmori with her work, right? And they did a number of workshops and seminars on the necessity of ending caste discrimination, just like we need to end racial discrimination. And so I thought, wow, this is a current day example of what was happening in some parts of South Africa, with like Indian leadership that was supporting the ending of discrimination of all people of color. Now, there were certain prominent figures like Gandhi who didn't advocate for that, right? So there's been both historically and of course currently too. And then just having the conversations, like us talking, I think there's a lot of people who want to have the conversation but haven't been able to, or haven't found a place to have it. Yeah, I'm curious what either of you think about that as well.
I mean, I guess I feel like I just couldn't agree more. Have the conversation. And I also know that I'm just that kind of person. Like, I don't know if it's the New York in me or what. Like, I'm just like, well, what do you mean? Let's chat about it. Why do you feel that way? How can we? And like, that's aggressive. And I know a lot of people can't do that. But yeah, like sometimes you really have to make it uncomfortable. When we talk about the other things, patriarchy, racism, things that are here, based in America to start, when we're talking to the people that are in their 80s, yeah, it's gonna be a little uncomfortable. It's gonna be aggressive. And like, we talk about it as brown people going into a really white yoga class, we make it uncomfortable. So you know what? If I'm gonna make it uncomfortable with my face, I'm definitely gonna make it uncomfortable with my words. We're gonna do this on purpose.
Yeah.
Like,
Sometimes you need to do that. I feel like I grew up feeling like I was born to be the change maker. And so I was the kid who was like in first grade going to teach him, like, I have freedom of speech. I have freedom to go wherever I want to go. Yeah, I was that pain in the ass child. But I was the one who knew my rights. And I'm like, no, no. And like, you can't beat me because it's against the law. I had a voice until the school system, my parents and society was like, no, you're not supposed to have a voice. And I
Mm.
think through the work that I'm doing and that we're all doing, I'm using that voice to be able to say, hey, this is for us, by us. This is a FUBU moment for us, by us. And, but we don't know it. So my goal in life is to wake us up.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Yeah. And there's so much to be woken up to, right? When you realize like, oh, this actually is, it's our birthright and our heritage and has been part of our practices, in various ways for generations. And that feeling, I think the more we can create that, the more powerful it's going to be. And that's also the core for me, is like to not get stuck on, oh, who created yoga first? Like, I actually don't think it matters, right? Like, and if we want to say like Africa, everything came from Africa first. So I don't think it hurts anyone to be like, wherever it came from, right? It doesn't, that's not the essential point. I think the essential point is like, our cultures developed this practice,
Mhm.
and we can honor that development in Africa and in India, and neither takes away from the other. And here we are, right? So what are we going to do with these liberatory practices? How are we going to move them forward?
Absolutely. Like I agree that it's kind of like language. Sure, we could say a lot of languages are based in Latin, but then all of them have branched out. You're not being offensive by speaking one way or another. You have to speak to the people around you for things to be developed the way yoga was developed in these different places. And I think you bring us to a nice space here. So like when you come to the concept of like yogic principles like ahimsa and satya, like what would you say, or I should say, how would you say that we can use those principles to also support this connection, that bridge and heal the divides in their community?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my favorite thing to teach on and think about and practice really are the yamas and niyamas, like the ethics of yoga. My main teacher, Shankarji in Bihar, said to me, like, you need to go back home, because I was living in India for a while, working in a school there and learning with him. He's like, you need to go back to the US and take yoga philosophy. That is what is missing in the West and what people need. And you're also like good at explaining it and talking about it, so he's like, just go and teach and share. And at the time, I was a teacher, a high school teacher, but I was practicing with yogic ethics like ahimsa, non-harm, or satya, truthfulness, in my own life. And so what I did when he said that was I just came back and I kept practicing. And what happened was groups of people, like friends and colleagues, would kind of want to learn more. So it just organically turned into like, hey, can we learn more? Can we practice together? So we'd meet every week and talk about the yamas, the niyamas, pick like one or two per week and explore them in our lives, and also do a practice. And that, I think, is the best way in, really, is to just live with them, to practice with them, to explore them, and to explore them in our own lives, but also in relationships. And then, like, I think of ahimsa really so clearly, right? Non-harm. The invitation is not just to not harm ourselves, which is a tall order, actually, like when I really think about it, or our people in our lives, but to interrupt unjust systems that cause harm, right? So right there, we're at social justice, we're at community care. And for some people, that part of ahimsa might look like service. That might look like, community engagement or volunteering. For other people, that part of ahimsa might look like activism or organizing. It's going to be different the way we each manifest or interpret it and then live into it. And that's okay. It's not like there's one way to do these. They're very broad for a reason. And that that lived experience of deep practice is, I think, the key. Yeah.
I'm just like, that's a mic drop moment. I'm like, the lived experience of practice. And then for both of us, we're in that space. I mean, for me, I came to yoga a little bit different. I came to yoga not from the physical aspect of it all, but from the spiritual aspect of it. Since I do Kundalini yoga, so for me, it became this: how can I live this?
So Kundalini is so complex. I don't know if we want to go there. You can tell me, but
Go for it.
uh,
Go for it.
what I appreciate about Kundalini yoga is that it is bringing in a yogic lifestyle and that it's working with a subtle body and with energy, but so complex because it's like this system that was created by a super abusive man, that then like many of the leaders are white folks who I feel like, we just see these like cultures of abuse
Mhm.
where sometimes there's a figure, but then there's all these people around that figure that perpetuate these systems. And so a big part, back to ahimsa again, and also like practicing yogic ethics for me has been in learning how to speak up, how to practice satya, to name unhealthy and unhealed systems so we can change them and not pass those on. Because just because we practice yoga doesn't mean we're morally right or that we're good either, right? And I think there is this weird, or not weird, it's like actually a very calculated projection of moral authority that and goodness that can come with yoga. But yoga can be used like anything to heal or to harm. And so Kundalini is fascinating to me because I actually think the practices themselves can be so beneficial, but so much of the culture around it has been so harmful. So
And I think it's changing too. I agree with that. I think that there's like, I know that there's been talks going on recently about changing and shifting of power, who has control of whatever, and there's this internal fights. I'm grateful I didn't start Kundalini knowing about Yogi Bhajan. I didn't know who he was. It wasn't until I was teaching him, like, who that? I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, so he's not connected to my practice. I think if I did, as a person who is, has dealt with sexual molestation, I don't think I would have done the practice. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I discovered Kundalini in Bali, where there was this open feeling, it was love. And Station, I've talked about this. I came back to America ready to practice this practice. And it was a bunch of white women all dressed in white in their head wraps, and they had everything on. And I came in with my little pink mat, and I was all happy. Like, who are you? Hip hop's down the way. You're not in the right class. And it was so uninviting. And it wasn't until I found a Black and Brown community that practices Kundalini that I felt like, oh, okay. And that I was like this. And it felt like when I first finally got into it, felt like I had awakened to my practice, my spiritual home, my yoga. But
Yeah.
you have to get past all of the appropriations, the feelings that feels that it has to be this way, you have to look that way.
You have
Even
to buy
wrap,
$300 pants
oh
and
yeah,
outfits and all this stuff.
we talked about that. And even wrapping the head, like I
Mm,
wrap my head out of, yeah, part of it out of respect, but also for me, when I don't, I get headaches.
mm,
So I do it for that, but I still have this thing like, am I trying to be something because I wrapped my head? Am I trying to look a certain way because
mm.
I practice Kundalini? And so I kind of bob and weave. And I love what you were saying before. It's like, are you doing harm?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Ask yourself those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also just thinking like how much we've had to tolerate as people of color, particularly, uh, it was good enough, or it was sort of good. So I put up with all the everything
Mhm.
else because I really wanted to learn. And like how nice it will be when it's like, it's not like that. Like you can wrap your head, you cannot wrap your head, you can do what you want, you can have the pink mat, you can do it, and it just feels good and it's really welcoming. Like I do think there's pockets and spaces and moments of that, um, but it's not the majority.
Yes, we do have to deal with that. And like, I've definitely been to studios where I was like, well, I mean, the physical movements were here, but that was it. Even though you've got a big old Buddha and a set of
Yes.
flags and all this other stuff. Like, I'm glad you went ham at TJ Maxx, but like, you didn't actually do anything here to create a spiritual space. So like, being that we know these cult situations have happened and these unfortunate, like huge just using of people and like your community and things like that. And like, honestly, like basically people faking the funk, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
how does a new yogi or somebody just trying to get to the mat identify a little bit more of that space? Like, how do I know, oh, I just walked into someplace fake?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is so important. And actually, I'm working on my second book, and there's a section around finding teachers, right? And understanding how to be discerning about those teachers or those communities. I do think, you know, for me, it's been a process. Like I've had to learn to trust my body, trust my gut, right? Like if I feel like a space feels off, then it probably is, right? So that's one. But also, it's hard if you're new and you're not really sure, new to yoga also, and new to a space and the practices there. It's like hard to know what is authentic, what isn't. And so for me, a lot of what I'll do is take someone I trust, it could be like good friend or partner, or even like I have a good relationship with my mom. So I remember when I first went to see Thich Nhat Hanh, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a little deeper in his community, but I want to make sure this isn't a cult. I had my mom come with me to a talk that he gave, and she's like, I couldn't really hear much because he has this very light voice. I couldn't hear much of what he said, but what I did hear seems fine. I think you're gonna be okay. You know what I mean? It was very helpful to have that second opinion of someone that I trusted. And then also I could say, hey, keep an eye on me. And if it seems like this is good for me or not, or if I'm heading in a direction where I'm like doubting myself or whatever. So I look for that. I look for, do I feel better in the space? Like, or am I finding that internal chatter or like critical self-talk is higher in the space? Because for me, like, again, it's a yoga teacher who just cues the poses. If I'm in an asana class, that's like good enough. What I really want personally, even still, right, even though I've been practicing for 20 years and I teach all this stuff, I want to hear from that teacher, trust your own body. Don't compare what you're doing with yourself or anyone else in the room. Like cry, scream, breathe, fart, whatever, let it out. Like I want to hear all those things actually every time I go. Like if I'm not hearing it, I have to tell myself. And it's like a kind of labor, right? Because of the culture of the way yoga has been. So look for, I just said a bunch of very specific things that for folks listening, is like, what are the things that make you feel comfortable, that make you feel welcome? So maybe it's that kind of inclusive language or welcoming language. Maybe it's a certain scent. Maybe it's a certain way the class is like actually set up. It can be different for all of us, but looking for those things that help you feel closer to your own autonomy, your own power. Because I do think we can say that what yoga, when it's working well, is doing is bringing us back to our own autonomy and our own power. And if it's not, if we feel like the teacher is right and we're wrong and we need to, fix our alignment or whatever it is, then that is more moving into that high demand or kind of cult like environment of a leader with power over versus shared power. So those are the things I look at. I try to just trust my body, bring a friend, and then like really value what makes me feel welcome.
For me, I want to energetically feel like, hey, this is a safe space for you.
Mm.
It's a safe space for you to process whatever and to get back into your own power, your own autonomy. I think for me, also hearing someone say it's okay to not hold everything. It's okay to need to take a pause. And like I tell my students, I'm like, I'm proud of you when you take a pause because you're taking back your power. You're honoring your body.
Modifications.
Mm.
If you go into a place and they're not telling you any modifications, you don't know what to do. This doesn't work for my body. I can't do this. I
Mhm.
physically can't reach here. I can't touch this. I can't bend that far. And you're telling me nothing? You
Yeah.
are watching people struggle and hurt themselves? Oh, I'm never coming back here ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we just all gave like a master class in how to teach an inclusive yoga class, which is so exciting. I'm excited to go back and listen and be like, right, yes, like we do get to expect this. And it's so not happening. Like the majority of yoga classes when I just go to a random class in any city, it's not like what we're describing.
Because they think it's supposed to be a certain way. You're supposed to have these high-end pants on, and you're supposed to have your hair a certain way. You're supposed to have the certain mat, and this is the way. This is what social media has said. Like I remember looking at one of your posts, and you were flipping through TikTok, and this is what I was just like, oh my God. I mean,
Yeah.
it just looks like, is this porn or yoga? I'm
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
really sure.
Yeah.
And I think because they think it's this is the norm,
Right.
and it's people like us who are here to change the world to say that, hey, let's reflect a little bit differently of what yoga is and how this can look and how it can work for you.
Yeah.
Right. And even at that, I honestly feel like there's a lot of yoga teachers that only became a yoga teacher because they were fascinated with their yoga teacher who also looked exactly like them. They became a copy
Mhm.
and paste of that person. And now I only know how to teach to my body because that person only really knew how to teach to their body. And I think that this is the right way. And
Yeah.
everybody looks like what you just described,
Mm.
right? And so it's like, yeah, so this is the right way. It's not. Is that's that.
But that takes education. That takes opening up. That takes being open, like what you were saying, Susanna, before about when you're traveling, you can be that closed-minded traveler. I need only the American food. Where's your burgers? Or you'd be like, hey, what's the local dish here?
Yeah. And yoga teachers, even like the most whatever, I think there's a possibility or a way that we can be more open, a little more open-minded than the average person or average American. And yet it really does take that follow-up and continued learning. And I also think about, I mean, it's something like 9% of the US population, somewhere between 9 and 11, practice yoga. That's a really small percentage when you think about it. And also, like, there was just a study done by the Center for Trauma and Embodiment that previously for complex PTSD, therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, was the gold standard. Trauma-informed yoga has now been found to be equally as effective.
Mm.
And we can look up these studies. It's like CTSE, like the Center for Trauma Sensitive Embodiment. And this is huge, right? Because we know this, many of us as yoga teachers, but there's actual data to back it up. And that other 90% or 89 or whatever percent of the US population or the world who may suffer from things that many of us do, like anxiety or, depression, back pain, like things that actually impact our quality of life in really extreme ways, yoga can support, yoga can help. And I do actually think that teaching in a way that excludes it's so tragic because there's so many people that can be impacted positively by yogic practices if they were open to it, if they knew. And the more that we do what we do and more people do what like inclusive yoga, I think the more people will come who want to, right? Like not forcing it on anyone, but who want to try it will be like, oh, maybe this could work for me. But I didn't think so because I can't touch my toes. Like I hear that all the time. You probably do too. Yeah. So it's like changing the representation. And that you were asking about the magazine, that's part of why. So the real reason I started the magazine, this is gonna sound terrible. I've never said this anywhere, but I felt like if I was a white man, there would be statues to me, right? In the yoga world. Like there would be there, I would have been on the cover of so many magazines but I'm not, and I've never been on the cover of any magazine,
Mm.
right? It's just like, screw this. I'm just going to start my own magazine because I'm so frustrated with us not being represented. And like when we do finally get represented, like I think of Yoga Journal, it's split covers. Like they had Jessamine and they had a white woman. They had Marshawn Feltis, amazing yoga teacher, doing a lot of like yoga as service. And it was split with another white person. I'm like, what? I don't even understand what we're doing here. Like you give us 1 out of every 100 and then you don't really give it to us, you know? So that was what was born from like, and I haven't put myself on my own magazine yet.
Okay, we're looking for that. So we expect that by the end of 2024, we're going to see you on a cover. We're calling you out if we don't see it by December.
Right, especially if that's what you wanted. That's what you started
Yes.
this for.
I mean, it just feels a little like, you know, I don't need to be on the cover.
Oprah did it. I'm just saying, if Oprah could do
Oprah,
it,
I'm saying
try
Oprah's on
it.
her own cover all the time.
I'm just saying.
Thank you. That's a really good point. Okay. All right. I need to channel some of that.
Right. And I mean, honestly, the concept of, I feel like they do things like that, again, to keep white people comfortable.
Yeah.
Just in case you thought somebody was creeping in, I want you to make sure you know, no, 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 you still got the power in this space. We're still framed for you.
I mean, even looking at during Black History Month, they were highlighting some people on their social media. In the comments, I had to stop looking at the comments because I started getting hot. There people are saying DIE is killing the game, you know, skills over color, because they were talking about, you know, you're highlighting the Black experience as a yoga teacher, and people were like, well, this shouldn't matter. Your color shouldn't matter. Like she's just insecure. And I'm like, no, we are teachers of color who people come to our class and we're like, oh, you're the teacher?
Mm.
Are you sure you're supposed to be teaching? You're not blonde. What happened to Karen?
Yeah.
Right.
It's terrible. It's actually so frustrating. And I do want to say, like, it's almost like there's more white supremacy that just kind of hangs out as covert, like, oh, just I'm so spiritual in the yoga space than in the general population. That's something I've been seeing in places like Yoga Journal comments, or occasionally I'll have a video that goes viral or something. And then there, all the white fragility comes out to play.
Oh yeah, it's so loud. It's so loud.
It's so-
And that's why we're here. And that is literally why all of us are doing what we're doing. We will see you on your cover. We will be calling you out. We will make our own magazine if we don't see
it'll
it.
okay. 2025, if not 2024, because I have a cover person who I'm very excited about. I can't say who it is yet, but I'm very excited about who is going to be on the next one, but I'll be on the one after that.
Okay, 2025, we are expecting to see this. If we aren't seeing you on the cover, how can people find you? And we're going to put something in the comments, but we want to know, how can people connect with you, and just be part of your world?
Yeah. Well, I have the most fun. I love hanging out on Instagram and sharing free education there. So that's my name at Susanna Barkataki. And then I run teacher training. So I have a 300-hour that's coming up in a online yoga and social justice training. So I love teaching. And then I think those are the main spaces. I mean, there's one other really cool thing that's coming, which is going to be like a yoga social media space. So it'll be all yoga all the time. And that I am very excited for because I hope it actually becomes like what we're saying is missing. And then we can just be scrolling, practicing with people like us, for us, and by us. And then we can take that into the studios and say, oh, I can get this here. Where is it at the studio? You know, and so it'll change yoga culture. That's coming in June.
Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being here. Thank you for blessing our listeners. But more importantly, thank you for being in this world doing exactly what we need you to be doing. We appreciate you being the change maker that you are.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for encouraging people as well to just take that moment of self-reflection and to get deeper into the concept of an actual yoga practice versus like what we see and just asana and the bypassing that goes along with that. Like if anybody fights for it with every breath, it is definitely you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you both. I'm so excited for this and for all the work you're doing.
Thanks. Well, thank you guys for listening to us, and we'll see you guys next week on Black on the Mat. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on Black on the Mat.
Let's continue connecting, sharing our stories, and sowing the benefits of having a yoga practice in your life.
Subscribe to Black on the Mat on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
I'm Seisha, and you can find me at Thick Thigh Yoga on all social media platforms and thickthighyoga.com.
I'm Danielle, and you can find me at HelloWell with Danielle on IG, YouTube, and HelloWellWithDanielle.com.